Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going deep today into Tata Technologies Q3 FY25 results.
Oh, yeah.
We've got a ton of material to cover, financial reports, press releases, presentations from investors, and we've even got some questions coming in already from listeners.
Cool.
So let's dive right in and figure out what all these numbers really mean for Tata Technologies and their future.
It's interesting to me right off the bat is how well they seem to be doing in spite of all the economic headwinds everyone's talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, 2.2% year-over-year revenue growth. That's not bad at all.
Yeah, that resilience really jumped out at me too, especially when you consider what their CEO Warren Harris said about the uncertain economic conditions, like you were saying.
Right.
Makes you wonder what their secret is.
Yeah. Is this just a good quarter or are they onto something bigger?
Well, let's find out.
All right.
So where do we start?
Well, we could start by taking a look at how their two main segments performed: services and technology solutions.
Services saw a decent amount of growth, which is pretty typical, but technology solutions, that's where things get really interesting. They jumped up 4.6% compared to last quarter.
Hold on. Why is that technology solutions growth so important? What's the context?
Well, think about the huge shift that's happening in the automotive industry right now. Everyone's talking about software-defined vehicles, or SDVs,
Right.
and Tata Technologies, they're right in the thick of it. They're providing the software that's driving this whole SDV revolution.
So they're not just building cars anymore. They're building the brains of the cars.
Exactly. They're strategically positioning themselves in a market that's absolutely exploding right now.
That 4.6% suddenly makes a lot more sense.
Right.
Okay, but what about the bottom line? Did this growth actually lead to profits?
Well, their EBITDA margin dipped just a tiny bit,
Okay.
but their EBIT and net income both went up.
Hmm.
And their CFO, Savitha Balachandran, she actually pointed out in one of the presentations that they've got strong cash conversion and a really healthy balance sheet. So it looks like they're managing their money pretty well, they're balancing growth and being responsible.
That's good news for investors.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I noticed in their press release, there's a lot of talk about new wins in Europe.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, specifically for like testing luxury EVs and software for next-gen vehicles.
Interesting.
So do you think that's just a coincidence, or are they making a conscious move into that European market?
That's a really good question. Europe is a hotbed for EVs, and these got some of the strictest emissions regulations in the world. So it makes sense for Tata Technologies to try to make a name for themselves there. Now, whether this is a one-time thing or a sign of a bigger shift, we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, time will tell.
Uh,
Now, another thing I found interesting, 84% of their services revenue is still from the automotive sector. But they also managed to snag a contract with the government of Tripura in India for ITI upgrades.
Right.
What's that all about?
I think it's a perfect example of how they're trying to branch out. They're not putting all their eggs in the automotive basket. This project involves upgrading like 19 industrial training institutes, which shows they're not just about cars, they also have expertise in education and training. And that's pretty valuable in today's tech world.
Yeah, that's true. So they're hedging their bets a little bit.
Uh-huh.
Now let's talk about talent.
Sure.
Everyone knows it's tough out there to find good tech workers. What's the situation like at Tata Technologies?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. They've managed to keep their voluntary attrition rate super low, only 12.9%, and their workforce is stable at 12,659 employees,
Oh,
which is pretty amazing when you see how other companies are struggling.
yeah, seriously impressive.
Yeah.
But can they keep this up? Can they really sustain this growth without running into talent shortages?
That's the question, isn't it? I mean, a stable workforce is great, but it's not a guarantee. They're going to have to keep investing in training and development to keep their current employees happy, and they'll need to attract new talent if they want to stay ahead of the game.
Makes sense. So you've talked about their solid financial performance, this possible expansion into Europe, their attempts to diversify, and their surprisingly stable workforce. What else is happening over there in their innovation lab?
Oh, they're definitely not resting on their laurels.
Okay.
They actually won some awards within the Tata Group for some really cool projects. One of them was this really innovative three-wheeler to two-wheeler conversion.
Wait, a three-wheeler to a two-wheeler? That sounds pretty wild. What's the point of that?
Well, a lot of countries, especially in Asia, they're really pushing for cleaner transportation. Electric two-wheelers are getting super popular, and Tata Technologies is using its expertise to create these really innovative solutions.
So they're not just building cars, they're building a more sustainable future.
Exactly. And that's actually reflected in their tagline, engineering a software-defined future. That's not just marketing fluff. It's at the core of everything they do.
Right, and we see that in their partnership with Telechips, which focuses on, you guessed it, SDV solutions. So how does this partnership and their whole software-defined approach put them in a good position in a market that's changing so fast?
Well, partnering with a semiconductor giant like Telechips is a really smart move. Think about it. All those fancy ADAS systems, cockpit domain controllers, gateways, they all need specialized chips. This partnership lets them offer clients a complete solution, from software to hardware. It makes them a one-stop shop for SDV technology.
So they're not just developing software in a vacuum, they're making sure it all works seamlessly with the hardware.
That's right. And it's not just about keeping up, it's about being a leader in the SDV world.
Okay, so it seems like this software-defined approach is really important for their future. But what about their traditional engineering services? Can those two things coexist, or will one eventually replace the other?
That's the million-dollar question. It's hard to say for sure, but their traditional engineering services probably won't disappear overnight. You still need people who know how to actually design and build cars, but those services are going to have to evolve.
So how do you see that playing out?
As cars become more reliant on software, the skills engineers need are going to change too. Tata Technologies will have to train its people in areas like software integration, data analytics, and cybersecurity.
So it's more like an adaptation than a complete replacement.
Exactly. They're embracing the future while still using their existing strengths.
All right, let's bring it back to the present for a second. The press release mentioned some other wins and developments this quarter. Anything particularly interesting that stands out to you?
Yeah, a couple of things. First, their customer base is getting more diverse. They won a contract with a global contract manufacturing company, which is cool because it shows that companies outside the traditional car companies are starting to recognize their expertise.
That's good for them having a wider range of clients.
Yeah, it makes them less dependent on any one industry.
Exactly. What else caught your eye?
Oh, the deal they made with a North American Tier 1 automotive supplier for software platform development and testing.
Oh, interesting.
It's a pretty big deal because it shows they're not just talking about this engineering, software-defined future stuff. They're actually going out there and getting those software-focused contracts.
Actions speak louder than words,
Yeah.
right?
And it's not just external partnerships either.
What do you mean?
Remember those internal awards I was talking about, the ones they won within the Tata Group, the
Yeah.
three-wheeler to two-wheeler conversion?
Mhm.
That shows they're serious about developing new things in-house.
Mhm.
Plus, they're playing around with cool tech like Gen AI. They're even using it to create a digital sales assistant. It's like they're firing on all cylinders right now.
So they're combining partnerships for scale with internal innovation for agility.
Exactly. It's a smart strategy.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Steady financial performance despite a tough economy, focus on software-defined vehicles, big wins in Europe in the software space, a commitment to innovation. If you had to summarize all this for someone who just wants the quick takeaway on where Tata Technologies is headed, what would you say?
I'd say they're in a great position for growth. They're doing a great job of navigating a really complex market. They're embracing new tech, and they're diversifying what they offer.
And they're not just an engineering company anymore, right?
Right. They're becoming a real player in the future of how we get around.
Well said. Now, before we move on to the next part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about.
Okay.
We've talked about their commitment to this software-defined future, but what does that actually mean for their traditional engineering business in the long run? Is this the beginning of a complete transformation that will fundamentally change the company, or is it a smart evolution that builds on what they already do well? That's something to ponder as we head into part 2.
Welcome back. Hope you had some time to think about that.
Oh, I've been thinking about it all day.
Really?
Yeah, it's got me curious. Maybe we can dig into their financials a bit more and see what kind of clues we can find.
Absolutely. The numbers tell a story too.
Let's get down to business and crunch some numbers then.
Okay, so looking at their consolidated income statement, their total operating revenue for Q3 FY25 was a pretty solid $13,174 million. That's a 2.2% increase compared to last year and 1.6% from last quarter.
Just like we saw in the press release and the CEO's statement.
Yep, steady growth, even with the economic uncertainty we were talking about.
Makes you wonder what their secret sauce is.
I know, right? But it gets even more interesting when we break it down by segment. Services, which is their core business, brought in $10,127 million. Steady growth, as expected. But it's the Technology Solutions segment that's really exciting. It grew 4.6% compared to last quarter, reaching $3,047 million.
There it is again, that technology solutions growth. They really seem to have found something special with those software-defined vehicle solutions.
It's all about aligning with where the industry is going.
It does seem like the whole automotive world is moving towards software-driven everything.
It is, and Tata Technologies is riding that wave.
Now, let's talk margins. Their investor presentation shows a gross margin of 28.7% for Q3.
Which is actually a little lower than last quarter, but it's still pretty healthy, especially when you consider all the supply chain problems and pricing pressure everyone's dealing with.
Good point. And their EBIT margin actually went up a bit to 16.1%,
Exactly, which means they're doing a good job of controlling their expenses and turning revenue into profit.
which is always a good thing.
Always.
Speaking of profit, their net income for the quarter came in at 1,686 million.
That's a jump of 7.1% from the previous quarter.
Pretty significant. That tells me they're able to take advantage of growth opportunities while still keeping costs under control.
Definitely a good sign.
Okay, so the income statement is looking pretty positive. But let's dig into some other interesting metrics. What else did you find in their investor presentation?
Well, there are a few things worth mentioning. Their DSO, or Days Sales Outstanding, is currently 90 days.
Okay, for those of us who don't speak finance, what does that actually mean?
It basically tells us how long it takes them to collect payments from their customers. 90 days is pretty normal. It shows they're managing their cash flow effectively.
So, like if you did some work and had to wait 3 months to get paid?
Yeah, exactly. You'd want to make sure you had enough cash on hand to cover your expenses in the meantime.
Definitely. Speaking of cash, how are they doing on that front?
Their cash and cash equivalent balance was $154.1 million at the end of December.
Wow, that's pretty healthy.
It is. It shows they're converting their sales into cash and managing their finances responsibly.
That kind of financial stability gives them a lot of options, right?
Right. They can weather economic storms and they can invest in future growth, maybe even look at strategic acquisitions.
Smart. Okay, so their finances seem solid. What about their operations? Does the investor presentation tell us anything about their employees or their customer mix?
Sure. They have 12,659 employees right now, which hasn't changed much. And what's impressive is that their voluntary attrition rate is only 12.9%.
That's really low for the tech industry.
It is. It tells me they're doing a good job of creating a positive work environment and attracting top talent.
Because happy employees are productive employees, right?
Exactly. And that's essential for any company that wants to grow and succeed.
Absolutely. Now, the presentation also breaks down their revenue by geography and industry. What does that tell us?
Well, 77% of their revenue comes from outside India, mainly from India and Romania. That shows they're able to deliver their services globally and tap into a diverse talent pool.
So they're thinking globally, acting locally.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
And within their services segment, 84% still comes from the automotive sector.
So their roots are still firmly planted in the automotive world,
They are, but they're also making a real effort to diversify their customer base.
like with those new clients in contract manufacturing, right?
Exactly. They're expanding beyond the traditional car companies, which is a good move for long-term stability.
So what's the big picture that emerges from all these numbers?
I'd say the numbers support what we've seen in the other materials. Tata Technologies is financially strong, they're growing steadily, and they have a clear strategy. They're well-positioned to take advantage of the opportunities in this software-defined future of mobility.
That's a great summary. Now let's go back to those diversification efforts we were talking about. It seems like they're really trying to branch out from their core automotive business. What are some of the things they're doing in that area?
Well, the contract with the Tripura government to upgrade those industrial training institutes is a good example.
Right. It shows they have a lot to offer in education and training.
And that win with the global contract manufacturing company is another sign that they're expanding beyond automotive. That project involves implementing SAP solutions across multiple manufacturing plants all over the world.
So they're taking their expertise in engineering and software and applying it to new industries.
Exactly. And it's not about abandoning their core strengths. It's about being smart and leveraging those strengths in new ways.
So instead of putting all their eggs in one basket, they're building a more diverse and resilient business.
Right. It's a way to reduce their dependence on any one sector and make them less vulnerable to market changes.
Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about innovation. We've already mentioned their awards, their partnership with Telechips, and their presence at CES. Let's dig a little deeper into their innovation initiatives.
They've always had a strong commitment to innovation. They invest heavily in R&D. They have a culture that encourages creativity, and they partner with leading tech companies.
Those awards they won at the Tata Innovista Awards were pretty impressive.
Yeah, they were up against thousands of other nominees from within the Tata Group, and they won 2 awards.
Their projects show that they're capable of coming up with really groundbreaking solutions.
Like that three-wheeler to two-wheeler conversion. That's outside-the-box thinking, and it addresses a real need for cleaner, more efficient transportation.
And then there's their Gen AI-powered digital sales assistant. That's using cutting-edge tech to improve customer experience.
And remember, they showcased their AI-powered solutions for software-defined vehicles at CES.
Right, CES is a huge event. Being there really puts them on the map as innovators in the SDD space.
It does. And then there's the partnership with Telechips. Working with a semiconductor leader like that gives them access to the latest hardware, which allows them to create those cutting-edge solutions for software-defined vehicles we keep talking about,
It's about building that whole ecosystem for SDVs.
from software to hardware.
Very strategic. But I'm curious about their R&D approach. The investor presentation mentioned a shift in their strategy. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure, they're focusing their R&D efforts on a smaller number of clients.
Interesting.
They're prioritizing clients who are making significant investments in R&D themselves.
So they're being more selective, choosing partners who are as committed to innovation as they are.
Exactly. By aligning their R&D with their overall goals, they can make sure their efforts are focused and impactful.
It's a smarter way to allocate resources, making sure every dollar counts.
Right. And those closer partnerships can lead to some really big breakthroughs, giving them a real competitive edge.
Okay, so they're not just innovating for the sake of it, they're being strategic about it, focusing on areas with high growth potential and partnering with the best in the business.
They're coming up with practical solutions that address real-world challenges and add value for their clients.
And it's not just limited to the automotive industry, right?
Yep. They're looking at aerospace, industrial heavy machinery, all sorts of new and exciting areas.
They're not afraid to push boundaries.
And they're sharing their expertise and insights with the world. They're active in industry forums, they publish articles, they're part of the conversation about the future of engineering and technology.
That thought leadership helps build their brand and attracts talent.
And it leads to more innovation. It's a positive feedback loop.
Innovation drives thought leadership, which attracts talent, which leads to more innovation.
Exactly. And that's a big part of what sets them apart.
Okay, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's take a step back and look at the big picture. What's the main narrative that emerges from all this?
I think it's a story of transformation. Tata Technologies is going from a traditional engineering services company to a much broader solutions provider.
They're embracing the future and expanding their reach.
And they're doing it strategically with a strong financial foundation and a commitment to sustainability. They're a company to watch, that's for sure.
For our listeners, this is a story of evolution, adaptation, and a lot of smart decision-making.
And it's just the beginning.
There's a lot more to explore. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll take a closer look at their investor relations, their competitive landscape, and their commitment to ESG initiatives. Okay, we're back for the final part of our Tata Technologies deep dive.
We've talked about their financials, their move into new industries, their innovative projects.
And now we're going to wrap things up by looking at their investor relations, their competitive landscape, and their approach to ESG.
Yeah, these are all really important things to consider when you're trying to get a complete picture of a company.
So let's start with investor relations. How are they communicating with shareholders and the investment community in general?
Well, they seem to be doing a good job of keeping investors informed. They're publishing detailed reports, doing presentations. They're available for analyst calls and interviews.
That transparency is important, right?
Oh, absolutely. It shows they're not trying to hide anything.
And it builds trust.
Exactly. And their messaging has been consistent, focusing on their growth strategy and that whole software-defined future.
Which seems to be working. The market seems to like what they're hearing.
Yeah, they're getting a positive response.
We actually got a few questions from listeners who are investors, and they're really interesting.
Oh, yeah. What are they asking?
Well, they want to know what's driving Tata Technologies' growth, what their outlook is for the future, how they plan to deal with challenges, the things investors care about.
Makes sense.
Huh.
They want to make sure they're making smart decisions.
One question that came up a few times is whether these results were in line with what investors were expecting. Were there any big surprises?
It seems like the overall reaction has been pretty positive. Their revenue growth, their profitability, their strategic moves. It seems like they're meeting or even exceeding expectations. They're delivering on what they promised.
So that's always good to hear. Have they said anything about dividends or share buybacks?
Not in these recent reports. but their cash position is so strong, they definitely have the flexibility to consider those options down the road.
So investors are keeping their eyes peeled.
They are. They're watching closely.
Okay, so investors seem pretty happy with Tata Technologies right now. Let's shift gears a bit and talk about the competition. What's the competitive landscape like, and how does Tata Technologies stack up against other players in the industry?
Well, the engineering services industry is tough.
Yeah.
There are a lot of big companies fighting for the same clients, but Tata Technologies has a few things going for it that give it a real advantage.
Like what? What makes them stand out?
Their deep expertise in the automotive industry is a huge plus. They've been working with major car manufacturers for decades, and that kind of experience is priceless in a market that's changing as quickly as this one.
It's like they have a head start.
In a way, yeah. They've built strong relationships and a reputation for quality.
And then there's their focus on that software-defined future. We've talked about it a lot.
Right, they're not just trying to keep up, they're trying to lead the way in the automotive industry.
They're not just passengers on this ride, they're helping to drive it.
Exactly. Another advantage is their global delivery model. They can deliver services from anywhere in the world, which helps them stay competitive on price.
That global reach is definitely an asset. And we can't forget about their diversified portfolio. Expanding beyond automotive into things like aerospace and industrial machinery makes them less vulnerable to ups and downs in any one industry.
Right. It spreads the risk.
And of course, there's innovation, which we talked about earlier. All those R&D investments, the partnerships, the awards, it all adds up.
It does. It shows they're serious about staying ahead of the curve.
So it's a combination of things that sets them apart. Expertise, global reach, diversification, innovation, a loyal client base. It's a pretty powerful package.
It is. They're not just selling services, they're offering solutions and real value.
Okay, so they're a force to be reckoned with. Now let's talk about their ESG initiatives. How are they addressing those environmental, social, and governance issues that are so important these days?
Well, Tata Technologies has a long history of focusing on sustainability and social responsibility. It's not a new thing for them.
So it's not just a trend they're jumping on.
Nope. They've integrated ESG principles into their business strategy. They've set ambitious goals, and they're transparent about how they're doing.
It's one thing to talk the talk, it's another to walk the walk.
Exactly. And they're walking the walk. They're taking real steps to reduce their environmental impact. They're using less energy, switching to renewable energy sources, minimizing waste.
That's great to hear. What about on the social side?
They're committed to diversity and inclusion. They're trying to create a workplace where everyone feels respected and has equal opportunities. They understand that having a diverse team brings new perspectives and ideas, which leads to better solutions.
So it's not just the right thing to do, it's also good for business.
Exactly. And they're actively involved in their communities.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that.
They're supporting education programs, helping people develop new skills. They're even involved in disaster relief efforts.
Wow, that's amazing. It's great to see a company giving back like that.
And on the governance side, they're all about ethical behavior. They're committed to transparency, accountability, and compliance with all the rules.
So they're doing business the right way.
The right way.
It sounds like their commitment to ESG isn't just a PR stunt. It's part of who they are.
It is. They're building a sustainable business that benefits everyone. Their employees, their customers, their communities, and the planet as a whole.
And that's appealing to investors who are looking for companies that are making a positive impact.
It is. Those investors are becoming more and more common. They want to see that their money is supporting companies that are doing good in the world.
And Tata Technologies is doing a good job of showing that you can be profitable and responsible at the same time.
It's a winning combination.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Tata Technologies, what are the key things our listeners should take away from all this?
I think the biggest takeaway is that Tata Technologies is a company on the move. They're growing, they're profitable, and they have a clear vision for the future. They're definitely a company to keep an eye on.
They're embracing new technology, especially in the automotive industry, and they're not afraid to push the boundaries.
They're not just an engineering company anymore. They're offering a much wider range of solutions, and they're expanding into new markets.
They're thinking big.
Yeah.
And their strong financials, their strategy, and their commitment to ESG make them a very attractive investment opportunity.
They're not just adapting to change, they're helping to create it.
They're driving innovation and shaping important conversations about the future.
They're a company with a brave future, that's for sure.
It's been a really interesting journey exploring their story. And we hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of who they are and what they're all about.
There's always more to learn, of course, but hopefully this has given you a good foundation.
That's what the deep dive is all about. exploring, learning, and digging deeper into the things that matter.
So until next time, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep diving deep into the world of knowledge.
Thanks for joining us.